Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to some of you. And welcome to this morning's keynote as part of SourceCon 2020. It's an absolute delight to have you all with us. Thank you so much for giving us your time this morning. Here at Source Labs, we talk a lot about the concept of digital confidence. Never more so in this world today has digital confidence been so important. And I was talking to an economist the other day who said to me that those of us in the digital economy are doing so much at this moment. And so on behalf of Source Labs, thank you all for the digital work that you continue to do as we help you deliver digital confidence to your customers. My name is Aled Miles, and I'm just honored to be the CEO of Source Labs and to lead today's keynote. As you can see, there's an empty room, and somewhere in that room is lurking, I hope, Niloofar Razi Howe, who's going to be joining us, I hope, in just a second. Nilu, are you there? Aha!
There.
What a relief. Imagine me having to do the keynote interviewing myself. How boring would that be? Welcome to SourceCon 2020. It's a delight to have you.
Thank you. Don't sell yourself short. I know how fantastic and fabulous your background and experience is.
You're very kind. Well, we're delighted to spend the next 30 minutes or so with you. I mean, look, as the audience sort of, gets a sense of who you are, I think looking at you, one of the things that we would expect you to not be is an ice hockey player. Is it seriously true that you learned to play ice hockey?
It is. So, people have different versions of a midlife crisis. For me, it was looking around and going, all right, I have these kids. They seem to be laughing all the time and having a lot of fun. Well, what are they really enjoying doing? And all three of my kids were playing hockey. So I thought one day, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to pick this up. This looks like fun. If you know anything about my personality, I did it the way only I would, which is I joined a team without knowing how to skate. And there was at least one hospital visit that season, but it's a fantastic sport. I mean, why would an Iranian-born, American immigrant pick up ice hockey?
The most natural thing in the world to think to do, of course. I don't know why I've never thought of it. It's dangerous, Nilu.
Well, it's not as dangerous as some other sports as you get older. And because of my schedule and all of that, really the only league I could join was a co-ed league where I was one of two women. So, and I think everyone else on the team other than the other women had at least 100 pounds on me, probably more like 150 pounds. So, and this league was called the Not So Good League. So, when a guy who has 150 pounds can't stop themselves as they approach you, occasionally it has some interesting outcomes, but it's fantastic. I mean, to me, what was amazing about picking the sport up is when I'm on the ice, I can't think about anything else other than staying upright. And so it becomes this incredible mental break, especially, when the world is moving so fast and there's so much pulling on you, having these moments that give you that break and let your mind just kind of go blank for a moment. Has tremendous value.
Look, you've in your career, you've helped organizations, companies deal with radical change and transformation. But in your own personal life, you've had more disruption than perhaps most of us will ever get in our life. Tell us a little bit about that. And how has it molded you as a human being, as a person?
Sure. So I actually spent a fair amount of time thinking about this in the past 8 weeks or so, because the last time I was in a government lockdown, I was a kid and it ended in a revolution. And my life was turned upside down in a nanosecond. The moment protests broke out and people were getting shot in the streets, the schools got shut down. And I went within 24 hours from, being in the confines of a very loving family to being shipped away and bouncing from country to country. So I first ended up in your neck of the woods. I found myself living in the attic of an English boarding school. And thankfully I had read Charles Dickens already. So I had a sense of what I was in for in that attic. And when it was pretty clear
that you fled from Iran, right?
Yes.
Just so everybody knows. Yeah.
Yes. So that was Iran. And we didn't know if this was a temporary or permanent thing. So initially it was stay close. I was sent to boarding school in England. And then when it was pretty clear that this was not a temporary thing, my parents decided that really the country that would embrace us most openly was the United States. So I actually came to the US by myself when I was 11 and lived with an incredible family in San Francisco until my father made it over. Then he and I lived together for some amount of time in this, all we had were 2 mattresses and an end table. And a television that someone loaned us out of pity. But it was some of the most incredible memories I have are from that time with my dad. And eventually my mother and my brothers came over and we made this life for ourselves. But it did, left an indelible imprint on me as a kid to be able to go from, life in Iran and then, from country to country, context to context. And the biggest gift that experience gave me is the gift of resilience, right? I learned that no matter what, I was going to be okay. Whatever the world throws at me, I'm going to be okay. And that gives me this innate optimism that and hopefulness, almost by default at this point, that really is helpful. The other thing that it gave me was the understanding of the importance and power of diversity. So as I went from culture to culture, as I learned to context shift, I learned that every culture, every background, every perspective has value. And if you can pull all of that together, you will always get to a better outcome. And if you think about it, think about the Renaissance, right? What the Medicis did during the Renaissance was pull people from all sorts of different backgrounds, right? Artists, scientists, mathematicians, and that's how we got the Enlightenment. So the power of diversity, that really was inculcated into me from a very early age. The other thing I learned, and this makes it kind of hard to deal with me sometimes, is that the status quo is a mirage, right? So human beings hate change. And if you doubt that, just try taking a newborn from their parents' arms. It does not like being removed from the safety of what it knows. And human beings are born with 152 cognitive biases, most of which are about making us feel comfortable, about the status quo, about where we sit today. But the truth is that change is the only constant in life. And for the first time in human history, we're living at a point where the pace of change is actually outstripping our ability to adapt as human beings. And so if you don't learn to embrace that change, you will be left behind. One last thing I want to say, and I think it's very relevant in terms of what's going on today, is, the experiences I went through as a kid weren't always easy, right? And there was a lot of time when you might be, I was fearful for sure. But what I learned through those experiences is that fear and anger are sort of part of the journey, but they really have no place on the road to progress, right? And the way I like to talk about it, especially with respect to tech, is human beings have an operating system, right? Our operating system is flawed. It was fantastic when we lived in caves and we were fighting off tigers and lions for a living, but it doesn't do a whole lot to help us in the age of tech acceleration. So what we need right now is a force upgrade of our OS, and we can do it. We've got to get to a place where the amygdala is not ruling our brain and our frontal cortex is there. What happens when you're fearful, what happens when you're angry, is that you stop dead in your tracks and all you look for is other things that are out to get you. We live in a world today where we need to focus on solutions, not on problems. And you talk about hockey. I also ski, and I love tree skiing. And what I love about tree skiing is there's a lot of things I love about it. You have to keep your eyes on the path through, because if you start looking at the obstacles, you're just going to crash into them, right? It's the same thing with mountain biking or a whole bunch of sports. you've got to focus on the path. You've got to focus on the solutions. You can't stay focused on all the obstacles that are in your way. So again, it comes back to that innate sense of hope and optimism. Now, I know you also had an interesting background, so this can't all be about me. And you had an interesting upbringing as well. And I'd love to know how your upbringing impacted you and your perspective on the world.
I think we've been going for 10 minutes, and I think the audience already has a pretty good view of you straight away, both in terms of your ability to deal with change and transformation and the fact that you're now interviewing me. That's not part of the script. My background is nothing. It's nothing compared to yours. I grew up as the son of a Welsh Baptist minister, and deep in the valleys of Wales, where the experiences that I gained were through my mother and father, constantly dealing with people and people's emotions, and this ability to deal with change or awfulness that could suddenly beset people who obviously sought out the local priest. And I think that gave me a perspective on difficulty and how you deal with the need for change and the need to keep your sights on the good. And I think we're gonna come to some of that in a second. Like you, I found myself here in the United States, somewhere that I am so thankful for. And for all the opportunities that this country has given me. And it's just so interesting to see what's going on here and back in the UK that we both know so well in the midst of all of this. Just being a little bit clever in my sparring, I want to come back to you. Look, you've obviously dealt with just huge amounts of change, as you just explained to us. But as your career developed, you have been an instrument of change. Today you sit on the North American board of Morgan Stanley. You have been the chief strategy officer for one of the world's largest security companies, RSA. What is it about great leadership or great organizations that copes in moments like this? Times of change, times of transformation? So
I won't turn it on you quite yet, because I'd love to know your experience as SOSCON taking the company through this moment as well. But to answer your question, look, what is the quintessential job of a leader, right? What makes you a great leader, whether it's in times of massive change and disruption or not. By the way, the or not is a thing of the past. As we look forward, every day is going to be a day of massive change and transformation. To be a great leader, people have to believe that you're going to take them somewhere better than they are today. They're going to have to follow you to a better future, and you've got to be able to rally them to that future, right? And so what does that take? How can you do that credibly, especially given everything that's going on? First of all, you have to have purpose, right? There has to be a reason behind what you're doing and the mission that you're embracing and the shared outcome that you're taking people to. Second thing is you have to be authentic, right? So people have got to know that they can trust you. And to trust you, they have to have intimacy with you, intimacy about your values, intimacy about what you believe in, intimacy about who you are as a human being. And there has to be clarity. Clarity is the antidote to anxiety. And so you got to have purpose, you got to be authentic, and you've got to be clear about what you're trying to drive to. Now, to pull all of that together, I started by saying you've got to be able to rally people to a better future. You've got to be able to tell stories. And it just doesn't matter where you sit in an organization or what your leadership role is. Everyone has to be able to tell great stories about why the next sprint matters, why the next feature matters, why the next product matters, why the company matters. And so that's that gift, that art of storytelling is something everyone's got to be able to embrace. Now, Optimism is sort of the key to all of this. And I just want to say, and we're seeing it today, it is really easy to be a pessimist. And by the way, most of the time you're going to be right if you're a pessimist, right? Give me a Nobel Prize winning, Pulitzer Prize winning novel, and I'll tell you the 10 things that are wrong with it. It is way too easy to be a critic. It is very hard to be an optimist. You have to be an optimist if you're going to be a leader. But it's not sort of blind optimism, coming with that purpose, coming with that clarity, coming with that authenticity and empathy about understanding what people are dealing with. That's what great leadership is about, from my perspective. How has it been? By the way, tell us how it's been. I mean, you're leading this incredible company. I mean, by the way, your conference, I just have to tell you, it is so impressive and such a testament to the adaptability and resiliency of people that you have over 4,000 people who've signed up for this, which is amazing. Congratulations. How does what I say resonate, and what's it been like leading Sauce Labs through this?
So I think you hit just about every nail on the head. And I'm not saying that because we're in this situation. So firstly, thank you for your kind words. I think the team did an extraordinary job. And it goes to show that, you know, there are parts of what's going on at the moment that have such greatness. To be able to embrace that many people this easily is a lesson for us all in the future, of course. Sauce Labs, fortunately, is in a very strong place that people need what we do. And we're very humbled and grateful for that. I could not agree with you more that what a leader needs to do is to create line of sight for the constituents, shareholders and employees, but also, particularly in this context, customers. That customers too know where you're going and what you can deliver in the future, not just now. So we think very strongly about our ability to influence digital confidence, both in terms of the relationship between the brand and the customer. Call that the experiential part, if you will, where confidence flows because of the ease of use, because it's a flawless experience, but also that it's a secure experience, that there's trust between consumer and brand. And we're just very fortunate to be in a position where we can contribute and help brands deliver digital confidence. And that's become our purpose, our raison d'etre, our reason to be. And it's amazing how our company, despite COVID, has rallied around that and has just desire to deliver for customers. And I think, you know, from a leadership perspective, I couldn't agree with you more around authenticity. I am not the most humble person. I'm the first to accept it. And I try to be better at that. But what I hope leadership also brings, particularly in moments like this, is self-awareness. And also just retaining that sense of humor that keeps us somewhat relaxed about what's going on at any time. Some of those are the moments that I think matter. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And let me just say, you can't be a leader if you don't have ego, right? You have to believe that you have a vision that makes sense and takes people to that better place. So it's not, you've got to have ego. The ego in service of something bigger is compelling. Ego, when it's self-serving and narcissistic, is not. So ego is actually a very powerful thing and necessary. But again, ego for a greater purpose, which is what you're describing here.
So, Nilo, I don't think we can go through this session without thinking about the effect of the pandemic and the economic effect. But on a personal level, what concerns you the most about this, either economically or socially?
So look, the pandemic is devastating on a number of fronts. There is no question about it. And the damage it's causing worldwide is brutal to watch. There's two types of damage that are happening here. One is the damage from the health effects of COVID. And the second is the damage from our response to COVID. And there is no easy path through this. We are balancing a whole bunch of very, very difficult outcomes, right? On the one hand, we have the medically vulnerable. And on the other hand, we have our children who are being impacted by this, by the lockdown. And we have the economically vulnerable. And we're starting at a very fragile point in society where for the past 20 years, at least in the Western world, most of the country has seen declining income, and income inequality has grown tremendously. So my biggest concern right now is honestly the fear mongering that's going on. Reciting facts about how many people have died every single day does nothing to get us to a solution. What it does is trigger the amygdala. And, there is a lot of research that's been done about this. Human beings believe in the authenticity of anger more than they believe in the authenticity of happiness. This is why stories that go viral tend to be very negative. And what the media is doing is tapping into that primal need for bad information. But that actually doesn't help us solve the problem. So the fear mongering is actually getting in the way of us coming up with a solution, bringing a diverse set of experts to the table. We need epidemiologists, but we also need economists, and we need a diversity of opinions around all the various topics to figure out how to balance the variety of outcomes and the different constituents that are being impacted by this. There's a Harvard professor of sociobiology, E.O. Wilson, has this great line that he came up with about 10 years ago. And the line was, the problem with humanity is that we have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology, right? And this problem is actually what we're seeing today in the context of COVID. So Paleolithic emotions, force upgrade to your OS. We can do this, right? We can stop getting mired in the negative. Medieval institutions, look, if government isn't moving fast enough to solve this, businesses can, people can. There is no better time than today for every individual to take a role and become a leader and inspire to a better outcome. And technology, look, the days of tech utopianism are over. We know tech can be used for good or bad. Let's use tech for good. There is so much data out there. And if we focus on the data, CDC has these super powerful visualization tools that anyone can access right now that compares COVID to all sorts of other pathogens. There is a way through this, but that's not the conversation we're having. We're just too stuck in a world where we're getting worked up. So that really is my biggest concern, because at some point, and this is as true, by the way, when you talk about digital confidence, when you're moving this fast, if you get on the wrong track, course correcting becomes very hard because you're moving so fast. Same thing, by the way, with tech. If you make a mistake in the technology, in the application, if you don't have continuous testing to make sure that you're delivering an application that does what it's supposed to do in the way that it's expected to do it, fixing that becomes really hard as the world explodes with data. So we've got to start using tech and data to solve these problems and not triggering people's emotions.
You mentioned digital confidence then. What does it actually mean to you?
Well, it's exactly so confidence, right, is a Latin, word. It means with trust, strong trust. It's when something does what it's supposed to do in the way that it's supposed to do it, right? The counterfactual would be the Iowa caucus app, right? Which was difficult to use, difficult to download, had all sorts of issues with it, and created all sorts of problems. But it is about delivering the experience that's expected, the outcome that's expected, in the way that the person expects it to happen. So that experience, that the customer experience matters as much as the outcome that you're driving to. And again, more important today than ever to get that right, because you are sitting in between the customer and the brand, right? Technology sits between the customer and the brand. The applications are sitting between the customer and the brand. And you're defining that experience. And the more seamless it is, the more secure it is, the more the customer can trust that it knows exactly what's going to happen when it engages with technology, the better the result for the brand.
Nilo, we've got about, let's just check, we've got about 5 minutes left. When you think about the richness of the experience of your career, are there any moments that stand out for you? Are there any experiences that you value so much, or people that you've dealt with? Anything that comes to mind?
You know, I've been really lucky in my background. I make my choices more based on people than anything else. And I've had this incredible cadre of folks who I've worked with. It's funny, I was talking to someone last week. A CEO of a company asked me to mentor one of their executives. And this person asked me, like, well, so what was it like when you were mentored? And I said, well, actually, I've never been mentored. I've never had a mentor, except all my colleagues were always my mentor, and they continue to be. My cohorts continue to be my mentors. Everyone should have their own personal board of directors, right? The people you go to ask questions and to get advice when things get tough. So I learned very early on, and to be honest, it's also a lesson through the revolution as well, which is what gets you through are the people, and really aligning yourself with people who you have shared values with. And together you can solve any problem and do anything. If you look at my career, it doesn't always sort of make coherent sense, except that I like solving really hard problems that no one else wants to solve with really good people. And put me in that situation, and I don't care if I'm working 24/7, 47 flights. Well, back when we used to fly, flying every week to try and get things done. I love solving hard problems and sort of bringing a different perspective to the table. I sort of can't. I don't imagine there's a problem that I don't believe that there's a solution for. And that's what I've always gravitated towards. So I've been pretty lucky in my career. What about you, by the way? What about your experiences?
Oh boy.
I'm not going to let you off the hook.
I know. I should have known this kind of stuff was going to happen. Probably one of the most influential leaders that I've had the honor of working for is John W. Thompson, who was the former CEO and chairman at Symantec, who is now the chairman of Microsoft. John is one of the finest leaders that I've ever encountered. And I know that for everyone around me in my career who had the chance to work with him, his focus, his unending drive, his sequentialism of thought, making sure that things happened in the right order, at the right time, in the right way, his love of people, his authenticity, but also his strategic mind. It was just so natural for him. And also he was just a pleasure to be around.
Well, there I was, right in the middle of telling everyone what an extraordinary leader John Thompson is, what an incredible influence he's had on me, and bang! The interview was rather sadly cut short abruptly by the technical gremlins that beset us. Well, never mind. Right, you got to roll with the virtual punches, as it were. I hope that you got to enjoy the majority of the interview that we did with Nilo. She's an incredible human being, as I think you got to see. Tremendous intellect. Her advice was extraordinary. Her views on life after all she's been through. Just wonderful to have shared with us here at SourceCon Online. Nilo, thank you so much for the preparation and for just being with us today. For those of you in EMEA and the rest of the world, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it enormously. We hope that you'll find the conference relevant, engaging, thought-provoking, and important to your lives in your professional work. Thank you for being with us. I miss Europe. It's my homeland, so it's especially lovely just to be able to send this message to you and thank you for your business with us and for your engagement. Have a great rest of day, and of course, be safe.